Okay, I'll call the meeting to order. If we could all stand for the land acknowledgement, please, if you can. Do we have the land acknowledgement? No. Hold on. Oh, sorry. We acknowledge we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Miigwech. So the first item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Could I get a mover and a seconder for this? Trustee DeVites? Trustee Laskin? All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. That carries. The next is declarations of possible conflict of interest. Does anyone have a conflict to declare? Hearing none. The next item number 4, is delegations. I believe we have one delegation this evening. I assume they're online. Sorry, we have Katrina Matheson from the Toronto Schools Caregiver Coalition. Katrina, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you very much. So
okay, great.
You've been here before. You have 5 minutes to speak, and then trustees can ask questions of clarification. So go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I would like to begin by thanking the trustees for passing the motion last month to accelerate the budgeting process. On behalf of the Toronto Schools Caregiver Coalition, we are pleased with this development, which is a small but important step to securing some additional leverage in negotiations with the province come June. We congratulate you on being the first board, as far as we know, to take this step. We are continuing to work behind the scenes to organize the trustees from other school boards to inspire them to follow your lead. It is our hope that every district could present to the province a budget that encompasses exactly what is needed to support its students. Although we parents and caregivers know that our big fight is with the provincial government, we look to our trustees to stand up on behalf of our students. And that means being honest and clear about the challenges they face. This brings me to our second topic of the multi-year strategic plan renewal. As you have heard during past delegations to this committee, our students face facilities in disrepair, chronic anti-Black racism and bullying, grossly overcrowded campuses, inadequate course materials, a lack of supply teachers, the loss of vital support staff, and more. In light of these issues, we find the expiring MYSP to be a gravely missed opportunity. It seems that what the MYSP has been in the past is simply a glossy brochure filled with intangible goals, ultimately giving rise to some limited impact pilot programs without actually improving the quality of our children's education overall. What we want from the next MYSP is a realistic snapshot of the failing aspects of our school and a year-by-year plan to measurably improve conditions. Given that this is the Budget and Finance Committee, we would also like to express our specific concern with pillar number 4, which prioritizes the strategic allocation of resources. While we appreciate that there is always some degree of strategy involved in budgeting, we do not accept this concept being used as cover to gut everything good about our schools. Adopted as a pillar, so-called strategic budgeting conditions TDSB students and families to accept cruel budget cuts justified by false conditions of scarcity arbitrarily imposed by the province. Strategic budgeting is typically cloaked in social justice language, for example, by prioritizing schools with a high LOI. Students from disadvantaged backgrounds may have more complex needs than other populations, and let me be clear, those needs should be met. But what strategic budgeting does is not that. As a statistical average, the LOI calculation erases the needs of students facing external challenges who happen to attend a school with a socioeconomically mixed population. It is also not even clear that any such strategically allocated resources are sufficiently reaching disadvantaged student populations at all, as reflected in the delegation to this committee by students from C.W. Jeffries last June. Hearing how abysmal things are at Jeffries makes us question if anyone at all is benefiting from strategic budgeting. Furthermore, in this time of high inflation, many middle-class families also struggle to access private resources and services, and their children also deserve to have their needs met at school. But the most insidious damage that strategic budgeting causes is the way it serves to drive affluent families out of the TDSB. With fewer students enrolled, less money comes in from the province. It's a self-perpetuating cycle designed to crush public education. Accordingly, we reject pillar number 4 in favor of one foundational pillar, the pillar of adequate funding for every school based on an assessment of the needs of each student population. Given the changes you have made to the budgeting process, we are already optimistic that this will be the year that we center student needs. Let's go all the way. Our proposed singular pillar and reimagining of the MYSP addresses the underlying issue head-on. Adopting a new MYSP that quantifies the hard realities about the poor conditions our students face due to a long-term lack of funding is critical to making a case to the province and the public that our schools and students simply need more. Thank you for your time and attention, and this is co-signed by Joella Connett of Scarborough Village, Ward 19, Sandra Ha from Earl Beatty, Ward 16, Alejandra Gonzalez Jimenez, Dover Court, Ward 9, Katrina Matheson, Rosedale Heights, and Regal Road, Wards 10 and 9 and 10, and Miranda Ang from Linwood Heights, Ward 20. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a question from Trustee Laskin.
Thank you very much, Katrina, for your passionate advocacy. It's sincerely appreciated. I have a favor. You talked about the board and its finances. We have a document, Financial Facts, with revenue and expenditure trends, where we talk about our gaps in funding. I've wondered if your group has reviewed that.
From when is that? You're talking about the one from last year, or is there one from this year?
Well, the one that's currently on the public website is based upon last year's budget process. Leading up to this year's budget process, we do it every year, and we'd be most interested in your feedback of what we can do better in that, in articulating our issues and our positions.
So what we're primarily advocating for, look, as you know, we are aligned in our desire to have a better position in negotiating with the province, right? I mean, like, our interests are aligned there, I believe. And we simply, what we feel that we are lacking right now is the transparency of saying, there are actually real problems in our schools. The strategic plan is, what it's been in the past is, promotional. In my opinion, it's promotional. And that doesn't serve our students. It's not a realistic plan or pathway. What we're hoping to find is more evidence that can be presented to the province, that can be presented to the public, that can be presented to parents to say, look, these are tangible needs at our schools. These are tangible things that we are lacking. We're lacking proper ventilation. We're lacking air conditioning. We're lacking after-school resources. We're lacking materials, textbooks, even licenses for the online tutorials. All these things that we're missing, those need to be identified and quantified, and the public needs to have the opportunity to understand what is lacking in our schools. And when the strategic plan is simply this, promotional thing about how you're going to transform education in this very lofty way, it's like there's a disconnect. It doesn't make any sense. So if you're inviting us to come work with you on budgeting, we're happy to do that. But what we're looking for here is a conceptual change, and a change to say, look, there's problems, and we have to be really open and honest about what the problems are. And that's the only way that we're going to get attention from the public, from the province. Maybe I'm being idealistic, but I don't. The feeling that parents have right now is that we're being gaslit. We look at this document, this MYSP, and it says we're going to transform education. I don't even know what that means. When you host, pilot programs to teach 50 teachers, how to teach coding. But then my daughter's school has computers from 1998. It doesn't make any sense. So we need to bridge that gap here. And
Thank you.
I
Sorry.
think if we start by being honest, that's the first step.
Okay, thank you. That time's up for Trustee Laskin's questions. Is there anyone else with questions for the delegate? No, not online. Thank you, Katrina. Can I clarify, did you send your delegation as a written copy as well? So it goes to all trustees?
I haven't yet, but I'll do so right now.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So next item on our agenda is number 5, staff reports, and 5.1, contract award operations. Who's speaking to this?
Through the chair, Senior Manager Chris Ferris is online to speak to this. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, and through the chair, on this afternoon's contract awards report, operations, we have a singular item in Appendix C that will require approval by the board, and that is a Microsoft EES license renewal contract. As always, if there's any questions about it, myself or other staff online are happy to provide any answers to questions you may have.
Chair, can I ask a question? This is Trustee Patel.
Yes, go ahead, Trustee Patel.
Thank you. Thank you for this report, staff. I just want to know what is the difference between the previous contract and this contract in percentage?
So the
Sorry, I will ask either Senior Manager Ferris or Executive Officer Singh to answer the question. Thank you.
Through the chair, just for clarity, the last part of the question, was that the difference from the previous contract that I hear in?
Yes, so I mean, for sure, I mean, there might be an increase in this contract, right?
Yeah.
Compared previously, right? So what was the previous contract compared to this in percentage wise? What is the increase?
I think, and I'll defer to Exec Officer Singh if he has additional information, but I think that might be something we need to come back on. So I don't have the previous contract value with me, but I believe there were some also additional Microsoft products that are now included in the current offering that weren't in the previous. So that would kind of skew the numbers if we were to look at them one-to-one.
Thank you. And to you, Madam Chair, when do I expect this?
Through the chair, I think we could have that within a day or two.
Thank you very much. And just to clarify, this is only 1 year contract of 3.3 million. The 3-year contract might be 10 million plus, right?
Through the chair, that is correct.
Thank you. And we had 3 bids, right? And this is the lowest bid?
Through the chair, correct.
And previously, who had this contract?
Through the chair, the previous contract was also with Soft Choice.
Okay, great. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm waiting for the information, Madam Chair, if staff can send ASAP.
Yeah, I think Mr. Singh, you had your hand up.
I just wanted to share, through you, Madam Chair, I just wanted to share the numbers. I think we can calculate the percentage then. The previous contract was at $2.6 million per year.
Per year. So to you, Madam Chair, $700,000 increase in a year. And if I can hear from staff, what are the basis of increase of 700,000 plus?
Sure. Through you, Madam Chair, few factors. One factor was starting September 1st, across all Microsoft contracts in Canadian dollars have gone up by 6%. Second factor, the original contract was Microsoft have different levels of licensing in place. The original one was, I'm just going to name that level. We were at MA3 level. And the new contract is at MA3 plus A5, MA5 security feature set also we bought. So that's additional level of licensing we've gone up as part of our cyber threat landscape strategy. and the additional security tools we needed in place to protect TDSB.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Chris, for that information. That's helpful. Thank you, Madam Chair, for now.
Thank you. Next, we have Trustee Laskin.
Thank you very much. Thank you for mentioning the security features. Mr. Singh, I noticed in the report, it talked about user security and protection. Will this make a difference in terms of risk moving forward under this new contract?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes. This next set of tools that come with the MA5 licensing model has been helping us to navigate the threat landscape we are exposed to on a daily basis at both desktop level, which is the user side, and also the back end, we call it the data center and the server side. On both key fronts, this tool has been a key asset. It's part of our strategy.
Thank you very much.
Okay, if there's no further questions, could I get a mover and a seconder for this item? Trustee Laskin, Trustee DeVitis. Are we using eScribe? Yes, please vote on eScribe. Vote is open.
Shan in favor.
Trustee Patel, your vote?
Yeah, voted online. I'm in favor.
Okay. Yep, that's good. Okay. Oh, there we are. Okay, so that carries. Thank you very much. Next is 5.2, contract award facilities. And this is Mr. Ferris.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. On this evening's contract awards facilities report, there are 3 items in Appendix A that are here for the committee's information, 3 items in Appendix B that require the committee's approval, and 7 items in Appendix C that will require board approval. I would also like to point out there are a couple of format issues and a price missing on the report, so I'll bring those to your attention now. The item numbers in all the various appendices were omitted this report, so the left-hand column doesn't have the ones that'll help you sort of identify the items within each appendices, and we apologize for that oversight. Secondly, in the Appendix C, the very last item, there's a contract dollar value that is missing, and that contract dollar value should be, I'll read it out for you now so you're aware of what we're asking the board to approve, is a value of $1,032,000. We'll make those corrections through Ms. Joseph Dowers and her team prior to a board meeting.
Thank you. Do we have any questions on the contract or facilities awards?
Can I ask a question, Madam Chair?
Yeah, go ahead, Trustee Patel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Madam Chair, Appendix B, I just want to understand for my knowledge, in the other items, what is substations prevention maintenance services?
Thank you. Through the chair. Substations are switch gears, so they are part of the electrical service system. We have this in every single school. It's how the electricity gets from hydro into our buildings, and they have to be maintained and inspected on a regular basis. So we went out to tender to find a contractor who can provide this highly specialized and regulated service. 3 companies bid, and this is the company that was the low bidder.
Thank you. Thank you, Maya. I got this now. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. If there's no further questions, could I get a mover and a seconder for this item? Anyone online? Trustee Laskin?
I can second it.
Oh, Trustee Patel, thank you. And could we open the vote, please?
Shan in favor.
That carries. Our next item, 5.3, is update on honoraria for trustees. I understand this is an annual item, and who will speak to this?
Executive Officer Snyder, please.
Thank you and good afternoon, trustees. The following report is in front of you. It's an annual process of updating the trustees' honoraria based on the term of his office from the November 15th through November 14th of 2024. And the policy is approved by FBEC because it's related to the honorarium. So policy 74 has been updated and it follows regulation 357/06 for honorarium for board members and Ontario Regulation 707 for student honorarium. These honoraria are based on the estimates that the board submits based on 2022-23, so a year behind. And as I said, go for the term starting November 15th. The honoraria for trustees next year is $23,967, and then the chair and vice chair have supplements to that to make theirs $28,967 and $33,967. The policy requires that we use the estimates. So one of those things you're going to notice if you looked at what was the honoraria for the current year ending, it's about a drop of $849 based on the enrollment changes between the estimates that were submitted for 21-22 versus the estimates that were submitted for 22-23. We would note, though, that in the estimates for this current term of office ending, the trustees, because the enrollment at the end of the year did drop, we're receiving about $553 higher this year than would have been based on the actual enrollment. So over the 2 years, it's about a $300 drop in honorarium. And we're happy and the last thing I'll say is that the policy, the only other change other than the dollar amounts is around some wording cleanup because the ministry's regulation changed where they had previous in the pandemic, for example, they had different dates of 2019. So that has changed in the regulation and we picked it up in the policy as well. It's cleaning up the language so it matches the regulation currently. And we're happy to take any questions, Madam Chair.
First on the list, we have Trustee McLean.
Thank you, and through the chair. I was just, when I read it, I was interesting in the concept of the 22-23 enrollment estimates. Since we know those actual numbers, I don't understand the use of estimates. Like, I don't understand the logic, I guess, between using estimates when we have real numbers available. Why is, like, I just don't understand, I guess, the application, I guess.
So through you, Madam Chair, I'll try to answer in two aspects. One is we're following the regulations, so that that's the rules that the regulation says. I would say that logically it's there because at the time of doing the honorarium, that's the most current information that's available. And they want us, I would assume, and again, this is assumption that the ministry is trying to set a point in time that the honorarium can be calculated. As we do revised estimates, financial statements, those numbers continue to change. And that's what the regulation says, is use the estimate number. So that's the logic we're using is to follow the regulation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Trustee Laskin.
Thank you very much through you, Madam Chair, to staff. Do boards have any flexibility here to pay more?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, they can pay less, but they can't pay more than the regulation amounts.
Then would it be factually correct that Toronto District School Board trustees have the largest honorarium?
Through you, Madam Chair, I would say that's true because I would have to do some analysis because it takes the enrollment amount and multiplies it by $1.75 and divides by the number of trustees on a board. So depending on how many trustees are on a board, there could be variations within that.
Right. So through you, Madam Chair, I'd like to ask staff, I believe we're third or fourth now because we have, even though we have the largest populations, we have the most number of trustees. And I think that that is worth putting in our financial facts because we are not remunerated on the per student that the general principle of the honorarium is based on. Because it's divided by the number of trustees, we're actually penalized because we have more trustees. And I find it incredibly frustrated that trustees and other boards have more honorarium. I'm not saying, I'm not blaming them. I'm blaming the formula. I think it's absolutely wrong that it then divides by the number of trustees, which means you're penalized because you have a larger board and you have more work to do. It just feels wrong. And I just felt like I wanted to say that out loud. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions on this? No, seeing none, could I get a mover and a seconder? Nobody wants to move in. Trustee McLean, Trustee Laskin. And could we open the vote, please?
Shan in favor.
Sorry, still waiting for, oh, thank you, that carries. Next is item 5.4, comments on regulations changes, disposition of surplus property and schools on shared site. So this is the regulations coming out of Bill 98. And who's going to speak to this?
Before I turn it to System Planning Officer Andrew Gowdy, I just wanted to give trustees an update of the process. So we have been, we are allowed to comment on this, and the comments are due on October 19th. So staff has prepared comments based on discussions with TDSB staff and TLC staff. We will take the feedback provided this evening and we will prepare a response that we will share that final response through Trustee Weekly and ensure that we submit it by the October 19th deadline. So I will turn it now to System Planning Officer Andrew Gowdy to walk us through the report.
Thank you, Associate Director. Good evening, trustees, staff, and members of the public through the chair. The purpose of the report that's before you is to share with trustees comments that TDSB and TLC staff have prepared on changes to 2 provincial regulations and seek feedback from trustees. These regulation changes have come out of Bill 98, the Better Schools and Student Outcomes Act, that received royal assent in June 2023. Both of these regulations pertain to school board property matters. On September 21st, the ministry informed school boards that information on changes to the 2 regulations was posted on the Ontario Regulatory Registry. School boards were invited to review the information and provide comment to the ministry by October 19th. The information that is posted on the Ontario Regulatory Registry is included in this report before you as Appendix A and Appendix B. The first regulation for comment is an amendment to an existing regulation, Ontario Regulation 444/98, disposition of surplus real property. This regulation describes the process that school boards follow to sell or lease a property. The ministry would like to streamline the regulation and reduce the time associated with dispositions. Our comments are shown on pages 33 to 36 of the report. We are generally supportive of changes to streamline and reduce response timelines. We have concerns about the minister directing school boards to dispose of property. We strongly recommend that school boards retain the authority to identify which properties are surplus to their needs and to determine if the property is surplus for sale or lease. Our position is that school boards have the best knowledge for making these decisions because they work directly with municipalities and understand the changing needs of communities. Bill 98 suggests that a property that is not used as a school for the next 10 years should be disposed of. We recommend that there be no time limit. City building initiatives take a significant amount of time, well beyond 10 years. When working with municipalities on these initiatives, school boards make plans for the use of their properties that extend past 10 years. We support the disposition of property at fair market value. We recommend that there be some exceptions to this, such as when a direct benefit is secured that enhances the education and learning opportunities for students. We recommend that school boards not be subject to the Regulation 444 process for minor property transactions that do not impact the ability of the site to function as a school, such as the severance and sale of a small strip of land. We recommend that greater flexibility be allowed for the use of proceeds of disposition beyond facility renewal, such as improving accessibility, upgrading instructional spaces, and building new pupil places. We support that the first priority for surplus property continue to be public education, and the second priority be other public priorities determined by the province. And if not needed for these priorities, then the property be offered on the open market. We recommend that the moratorium on school closures be lifted to allow school boards to right-size their systems, which will free up land to use for other public priorities. The second regulation for comment is a new regulation. It's dealing with schools on shared sites. This regulation will provide a process for school boards to follow to construct a school on a shared site, such as a school built in the podium of a residential tower. Our comments are shown on pages 36 to 43 of the report. We are supportive of clear direction on notices and approvals and streamlining the process to build a school on a shared site. We recommend that the approvals from the ministry in the planning stage of a school on a shared site be reduced to one approval point, occurring after a draft purchase and sale agreement is negotiated with the developer. We recommend that the ministry respond to a request from school boards for approval within 60 days. These changes will facilitate a school board working within a developer's timeline and consequently allow school boards not to miss out on an opportunity to build a school at a preferred location. We recommend that a separate funding process be created for funding schools on shared sites with flexible timelines. The ministry's current funding process, the Capital Priorities Program, occurs on an irregular schedule and has a small window of time for school boards to submit business cases. The timing of the Capital Priorities Program will not allow school boards to respond to developers in a time period that works within the developer's own plans. We recommend that the eligibility requirement for school boards to collect education development charges be changed to allow school boards like the TDSB to collect these charges as a funding source for schools on a shared site. We recommend that changes be made to the appropriate legislation to give school boards more authority and leverage when working with developers to secure on a school on a shared site and when working with municipalities to get access to city parks to use as playfields for schools on shared sites. In this report, we are providing the ministry with a list of unique considerations on the design of schools on shared sites for them to incorporate into the appropriate guiding documents. The unique considerations address school entrances, instructional areas and student amenity spaces, safety and security, play areas, and shared spaces. We are seeking input from trustees on the comments in this report. These comments will be incorporated into our document, and as Associate Director Zucker said, we'll be submitting the finalized document to the ministry on October 19th. The final version of the document will go to the trustees through Trustees Weekly. This concludes our presentation. We'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have and receive your input.
Thank you very much. First on the list, we have Trustee Chernoslin.
Thank you, and thank you to staff for giving us a really detailed outline of comments back on these regulatory changes. I have a couple of questions. The first, and here I'm looking, I guess, a little bit more than to staff, I'm looking to my colleagues to consider. Staff, and if I have it correctly, staff are suggesting on the order of how we offer surplus property up for disposition, that it go first to other school boards, then to provincial priorities, and then to the open market. And I guess, well, I realize that like from a fiduciary point of view, maybe that's how we would make the most in terms of proceeds of disposition. I'm wrestling with that as a public board, and wondering about whether we ought to be suggesting that these lands are first offered as public assets to other public institutions, like the municipality. I don't know, like kind of how they are, a little bit how they are now. I just wonder from my colleagues how they feel about that. I just think it's something that we perhaps ought to have some sort of discussion about. So that's just, I throw that out there. I had a question. I don't know enough. Actually, I'll be honest, I don't know anything about what localized education development agreements are, the acronym LEDA. It sounds kind of like it's an EDC type process just for a particular project, but I don't really know. And so I wondered if you might be able to expand on this, about what the current eligibility requirements for this kind of process might be. And I guess tied into that, on the suggestion that we were requesting EDCs on shared properties, why wouldn't we be asking for a reconsideration of EDCs, I don't know, in a different way, or like just given the size of our board, or if there's a place for that? I don't know if there is. Maybe this isn't the place for it. Maybe it's somewhere else. But anyways, that's my first question, is really around LEDAs. How is that different from EDCs? What is that, if you could expand from my knowledge? Thank you.
Through the chair, I think we can expand the wording that we have about funding sources and EDCs to reflect that EDCs would benefit more than just schools and shared sites, that it would benefit the TDSB and in other property matters too. The localized education development agreement, it's within the education development charge regulation, and it's a change that the province introduced in the last revision to the education development charge regulation. And it allows school boards to work with developers on a much smaller scale, on a regional or area basis, to enter into an agreement for the provision of a school in one of these creative arrangements, like a school in a mixed-use development. But that eligibility requirement of having a system-wide enrollment that exceeds your system-wide capacity, that still applies to the localized education development agreement. So when we first read about the localized education development agreement in the revised regulation, we thought that it was opening the doors to us to work with developers on this small area basis. But we learned that base eligibility requirement is still there, even for a localized education development agreement.
Okay, so perhaps the suggestion is that the capacity, maybe it's something around the capacity issue. This is through the chair, of course. Maybe something around the capacity issue, whether it's through ALEDA or whatever, if that's what you call it, through these localized agreements or through EDCs, needs to be revised. Because it doesn't really to me, it doesn't really make sense. Like, if we need a new school, like if capacity is so exacerbated in a certain area that the government is putting money into a new school, or that we're actually building a new school, we need to take that into account, as opposed to the traditional way of measuring it. And I think that maybe that point needs to be made somehow, that it's not just in LEDAs, but obviously I see where this might be in this particular case, but broader. Okay.
Sorry, can I just speak to that for a second?
Oh, sure.
I'm just wondering if we can maybe add something about asking them to look at their process to, again, we've done this before, but to look at EDCs by area as opposed to by system, right? Like that simple, just to say, we have growth pockets in the board where we're desperately in need of purchasing land.
Excellent.
And they're looking at our overall enrollment, and obviously if we're declining in enrollment, we're not eligible for EDCs. But if you looked at it by a specific area, then we would be able to show that growth that's necessary. So something along those lines. Would that, I think, hit at what you're, okay, thank you.
The other thing, and I'm just looking at my notes and I'm hoping it's still in the same, that I'm still in the same item, but I think it is. The suggestion requiring municipalities to share green space adjacent to sites and to have that embedded in legislation. I wanted to say that I really like that. I think that's a really strong point. I'm glad to see, I'm really glad to see that in there through the chair. It feels like many of our, I guess traditionally it's often been the case that we have sites that are adjacent to parks, but increasingly with podium schools and things like that, this is going to become more common. So I think that's really important. I see I'm out of time, so I might like to go back on the list, if that's okay at the end. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Trustee McLean.
Thank you, through the chair. And I certainly, the whole concept that our capacity, that there's a moratorium on school closures, which artificially makes us have a larger capacity that we would have, and then that they use that against us to suggest that we can't get EDCs is a flawed concept, is really, is just silly conceptually. It's just, and I've never understood the whole EDC thing logically anyway. They stop us from collecting money to pay for things that they are ultimately responsible for. If we had the money, they would be required to provide less of it to give to us. They're just cutting off their own access to money. And it just seems silly to me. And I have always believed, even if you're going to do that, the notion that there may be room in Scarborough and in Etobicoke doesn't change the fact that in North York, they have challenges. So instead of doing it system-wide, if they did a geographic, a 5-kilometer, 10-kilometer, something that would be reasonable that you could actually bus students to and deal with your student accommodation needs instead of needing to rebuild, that would make some sense. I do have a question with regards to the 10 years, this whole notion that if we don't use something within 10 years, the government thinks that we should sell it. So I'm looking to see if staff has done any work in establishing, like I know in my neighborhood, we had a school that we closed temporarily, and we kept the school, we repurposed it. They didn't sell it because they believed that the neighborhoods, it was secular in nature, and that down the road we would need to reopen it. And that's exactly what happened, and now it's full. So I'm interested in, have we looked at how many sites in our system that we've done this for, that we've had an asset for longer than 10 years that we then were able to repurpose and put to good use and deal accommodation issues because we have a talented planning team that's able to figure out the secular nature of neighborhoods, and instead of selling it and cutting our nose off to spite ourselves, that we have the asset for when we know we're going to need it. Have we done that kind of work so that we can make that argument?
Through the chair, we have some specific examples of neighborhoods that have turned over periods longer than 10 years. And we had school sites within proximity to those neighborhoods that closed for a period of time and then reopened as the local neighborhood school. So Castlebar is an example in South Etobicoke, and Bannockburn is an example within Midtown. And both of those properties planning staff had identified as core holding sites, quite a long time ago when they originally closed, as properties that should be retained to provide local school presence when required, when the neighborhood turned over. And so those are our two most recent examples. The Silver Hill property in central Etobicoke is another one that's going to be reinvented. Now that one never left TDSB use. We put it to other uses besides a neighborhood school. It was used to accommodate childcare as well as alternative programming. But the long-term plan for that site is to return it to a neighborhood school. So those are examples of parts of the city that have gone through cycles of regeneration and growth, and it took well over 10 years for that local enrollment pressure to materialize.
Thank you, and through the chair, have we incorporated those experiences into our response to make the point with the government that the 10 years, which seems to make sense to them, which is part of the legislation, in practical application, it's been our experience that number, we have real examples where that number proved to be inaccurate.
Through the chair, we reference Midtown. We don't mention the name of the school that's reopening, but we can enhance that paragraph and embed a very specific example within it.
Thank you. And again, through the chair, I'd just like to close by, thanking staff for the detailed report and the opportunity to participate and help shape the advocacy. This is, potentially really concerning for us and challenging for us. So having the opportunity to ask questions and to be heard and to help shape the argument, I certainly appreciate, and I suspect my colleagues do as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Trustee Laskin.
Thank you very much, through you, Madam Chair. I wonder if Trustee Cherneslin can, she asked us to comment on the order, and I absolutely support that the first priority of surplus property continue to be public education, and the second, other public priorities. So I'm not quite sure what you wanted changed, through you, Madam Chair.
Is it okay if I respond? So the second priority that staff are suggesting are provincial priorities.
No, it said we support the second priority by other public priorities as determined by the province's long-term care and affordable housing.
Isn't that provincial priorities? I read that differently than you do.
Well, I read it as by other public priorities. So if you wanted to take off as determined by the province, I'm fine with that, removing those words. But I'm reading it as public priorities first.
I think through the chair, I think I would need clarification from staff on what was intended, because I thought it meant the priorities set out by the province. And that to me means the current government, like whatever government is in question at the time, but maybe I misunderstood.
Building on the Greenbelt. Yeah, sorry. If staff can comment.
Through the chair, it's really harkening back to the vague language that the province has provided in their summary of these proposed regulation changes, but they did reference public priorities as determined by the province. So if that is not clear in its interpretation, then I think this is an opportunity for us to provide our own clarity. And if the will is to have public priorities as being really the second consideration after school boards, then one way is to eliminate as determined by the province and just leave it as public priorities.
Excellent, and I thank my colleague, Trustee Cherneslin, for raising that point. It's on page, I don't know. It's section, these are numbered.
It's under offering surplus property.
Yeah, no, I guess it's a problem when agenda pages aren't numbered.
Bottom of page 5.
Yeah, removing that. Okay, but now, if I can continue, I just wanted my colleagues to know, I believe staff already knows, and I appreciate staff providing some support as subject matter experts through OPSPA. But OPSPA also is commenting. The provincial work team, which I chair, received their comments, and it's still in draft form. But I wanted to quickly talk about OPSPA's priorities. Our capital funding must address growth and surplus spaces. School boards retain the authority to make final decisions. Capital benchmarks reflect true costs, that if boards are forced to sell property, there's a fund by which boards can acquire new property, and capital funding be approved based on planning projections in order that pupil spaces will be ready. So I thought that was interesting for you to hear. And the other recommendations are that the ministry needs to rely on the expertise from school boards and their staff who have already engaged in successful podium school capital priorities, that the ministry actually create a separate and distinct capital priority process for podium schools that allows school boards to work directly with municipalities and developers staffed with expertise in this area, that school boards initiate discussions and enter into MOUs with developers without ministry approvals, that the ministry have dedicated staff who understand different capital process and can expedite approvals, that school boards ensure regular communication regarding unique capital projects, and that the ministry work on more alignment with other ministries, i.e. Ministry of Infrastructure, Ministry of Transportation, and potential plans for growth, housing, and transit, so they support schools as needed. So I simply wanted to share that, Madam Chair, and I really appreciate the detail that staff went into our report. I have no other comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Trustee Earhart.
Okay, thanks very much. I appreciate the chair's comments and Trustee Laskin's follow-up questions on that. I really do share the view that it's strong interest in public priorities that would retain public ownership of sites prior to going on the private market. And so that's what the key point I wanted to convey. And to that end, I wanted to ask about how the regulation that the province is proposing to amend under the Education Act is related to the province's realty directive. Like, are we subject to that? Is there an active process where all public considerations for uses are done before it goes to the open market in the current framework? I'm just trying to understand how the sequencing may change with the proposal. Thank you.
Through the chair, how the sequencing exactly will change, it's not clear at this time, but the Ontario Realty Directive is separate and distinct from Regulation 444/98. So Regulation 444 is a regulation under the Education Act, and it just pertains to school boards, and it gives direction to school boards on how to sell property and lease property. Whereas the Ontario Realty Directive, it's aimed at provincial ministries and provincial agencies, and it gives them the direction on how to acquire property and how to dispose of property. And school boards are external entities to the intended target of the Ontario Realty Directive, which is provincial ministries and provincial agencies. School boards are referenced within the directive. They are referenced as an entity that gets circulated on a property that a ministry is going to dispose of. So it's similar in structure almost to Regulation 444 that says school boards, when you have a surplus property, you offer it to this list of other public agencies for them to consider first. And that list of public agencies includes other school boards and colleges, university, the city of Toronto, the provincial government, the federal government, local health integration networks, agencies that support mental health services to families and children, Indigenous organizations. Like, it's quite an extensive list, about 65 entities that we circulate surplus properties to. So the Ontario Realty Directive has something similar. So when there's a surplus property to a ministry, they circulate it to the federal government, school boards, colleges, universities, et cetera. So we're a recipient of those, but they're two distinct processes.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. And to me, that really helps clarify one way to be thinking about this. So in thinking about what the province is proposing with these changes in regulation, I think one of the first key questions is who determines that a school property would be considered surplus? And so I think it's very important, and I saw in the recommendations from staff that the board and that board staff have a say in the determination of what constitutes school surplus by the board, noting all the different kinds of facilities that we have on TDSB property that are needed for the basic functioning of a school board of our size within a city of our size. And so I think that's a really important and unique consideration for Toronto District School Board to be putting forward. I also think there's merit, and this is in follow-up to the chair's comment, for a comment like that to be coming from the board in addition to being from staff. And I do know that we as a board passed a motion, I believe earlier in the year, late last year, that enabled our chair to comment on Bill 98 or any of its implementing recommendations. So in my view, we're still within the purview and the values that we've already approved as a board around outlining that specific kind of priority. The second is, once we've made a determination that something is surplus, where do we go next? And so public education, I think everyone has agreed, is clearly outlined. Where it's a question to me in the proposal that's being put forward by the province is what's next. And I feel like the Realty Directive gives a way of example there. If something's going to leave TDSB ownership, my personal view is that it should go to public, it should continue to be held as public land, as public property for public priorities before it's considered to be held in private property for public priorities or any other priorities. And so I found the proposal by the province unclear in that regard, because long-term care homes and affordable housing do not need to be on public land in public ownership in this province. We've seen all sorts of stuff on that. So my personal interest in what I'd like to put forward to our board and also put forward for staff for consideration is a strong emphasis around public ownership and continued public ownership for public priorities. And certainly in the past few months, we've seen this as being a key consideration in all facets of the province. And particularly, I mean, I just saw a tweet from Toronto's Mayor Olivia Chow. Today's City Council increased the vacant home tax to 3%. We also approved my motion to use those additional funds to increase funding for acquiring existing buildings and making them permanently affordable. If I read that correctly, the city is looking at acquiring properties to make them public. And so I really want to emphasize that as the priority here. And I'd love comments on that from staff and also from other trustees if we feel that those 2 points are worth elevating at board level. Also, I've only got 30 seconds. There are other ministries beyond the Ministry of Education that would have an interest in our views on this regulation, and so wondering as staff if inputs would be circulated beyond the Ministry of Education. Thank you.
Through the chair, Trustee Earhart, can you explain what you meant by that last comment, please, about the Ministry of Education?
Yeah, it was just quick, and I can get back on the list if I run out of time. It's just we typically submit comments through the regulatory registry portal, but I would think that given that we are such a significant property holder in the province, how we view the prioritization of use, I think would be relevant not just to the Minister of Education, relevant to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing and the Ministry of Infrastructure, potentially also the Treasury Board. And so I just put that out there. I know it's not typical, but I do want to make the point that the Ministry of Education looks at the province as a whole. It doesn't look at the unique circumstances that are Toronto and Toronto District School Board, whereas some of those other ministries also are in the midst of considering some of the unique constraints and challenges that we as a board face within the municipality we're in within this context. Thank you.
No, thank you for the clarification, Trustee. And I think that's something we can look at, how our comments shared through the regulatory registry, you know, shared within the province. I don't have understanding of how that occurs, but we can make those inquiries. With regards to your first comments about keeping public properties within public ownership, Trustee Laskin and Trustee Chernos-Lynn offered some changes to that part of the report that speaks to offering of surplus property, and we decided to eliminate some language about as determined by the province, such as long-term care and affordable housing. Like that might be an appropriate paragraph for us to tweak the wording to emphasize that public property should remain within public ownership before, you know, being considered on the open market. But that might be an appropriate place for us to amend.
Thank you. And I'll go back on the list. Thanks so much.
Before we go back to Trustee Chernos-Lynn, are there any other trustees who've not spoken yet? Okay, Trustee Chernos-Lynn.
Yes, thank you, through the chair. So I just wanted to echo what Trustee Erhard has said. Like, I think it really needs to be clear that it's that they remain public assets, that opportunity is the first opportunity. And it may be that sometimes those are in line with provincial priorities, but we don't, I'm not sure I want to be in the position that we're upholding necessarily the whim of the provincial priorities. It depends on the situation. So I think for my comfort level, it's that these are public assets. They should remain first and foremost. The first opportunity for right of refusal would be that they remain public assets. So I will look forward to seeing sort of the refined language in this. I think that's important, and I appreciate Trustee Erhardt's additions on that as well. Thanks. Oh, and I actually did have one other comment that I didn't get to. This one is with respect to shared spaces. And I don't know, I know we mentioned it in the report we'll be looking at next on the agenda, but in this one on the comments on the regulation changes, on the part about shared sites, I don't know if this is like not particular to the regulations or we want to have this in there somewhere, but you know, one of the things that I've heard about one of the challenges of shared sites, in particular if it's a shared school site with another school, is that if one school population is underpopulated and one is overpopulated, how that is dealt with and managed. And I know in item number 5.5 that we're going to look at today, there is some discussion of that, but I wonder if there's a place for comment on that we want to make sure that there's avenues to that these are truly shared spaces, and that if one school in the building has a hallway of empty classrooms and the other one is bursting at the seams, that there should be avenues to rectify that and negotiate that piece. So I don't know if it's appropriate in the regulation to have that comment, but if that's appropriate here, but I just throw that out there as one of the other things that I noted, because I know, so I know it's mentioned in the GSN feedback, but here I wondered if we might also want to stress that. That's just for staff to consider.
Through the chair, may I comment on that?
Yes, go ahead.
The scope of this new regulation, schools on a shared site, it's not for those joint facilities where it's two schools being built within the same building. It's part of the definition that the ministry has provided. Schools on a shared site is specific to a school being built in a mixed-use development where the other partners are not school boards or the municipality or a childcare center. It's really aiming at private entities like developers. Now, the province is working on a process specific to joint use facilities, like building a single structure for two schools. So that's where that comment, Trustee Chernos-Lynn, should be considered and included, but not within the scope of this regulation.
So just as a follow-up through the chair, and this question, I guess, is for staff. I'm sorry, I didn't catch that when I initially read it, so that's my error. But what if, let's say there's a daycare on the site, and they have extra space? Is there, or I don't know, I guess I'm just trying to imagine, I just want to make sure that we're kind of thinking forward for any challenges that we might, there's so much in here, it's really good. Don't get me wrong, it's really strong. There's a lot in here that you guys have thought of. I just want to make sure that we're providing the province with every conceivable concern we might have or things they ought to think about as they're crafting this.
Through the chair, thank you for that comment. So we haven't spoken directly in this report to that circumstance of childcare having surplus space and the school in the condo tower podium expanding into it. But we have in the last section on the unique considerations for the design, we have expressed that there needs to be consideration for how a school in a podium is going to absorb fluctuations in enrollment over time. And a standalone school on a 5-acre site has options for accommodating fluctuations, like adding portables to the site. So in a school in a podium will not have that possibility. So we're suggesting that space for expansion within the podium be thought out at the time that the space is purchased. And it could be that we're planning for a utilization rate of the school at less than 100%. Maybe the target utilization rate is 80% at the peak enrollment, so that we have 20% buffer space or flex space for those fluctuations that we're fated to always encounter. Or it could be buying more space than we need and keeping it raw, not finishing it. So we did that at North Toronto Collegiate Institute, where it's a constrained site. We built with a developer, but we planned for 4 additional classrooms to be fit up at the appropriate time. The classrooms exist as floor space behind walls, and we didn't spend monies at the time that North Toronto Collegiate was made to fit up those classrooms. But when required by local enrollment growth, we do have the opportunity to expand into that floor space behind the walls and create 4 classrooms. So we've referenced that example under the unique considerations of needing to think ahead about acquiring more space maybe than the peak enrollment to provide that flexible space that portables would go on otherwise.
Thank you, through the chair. I did see that, and I had to kind of I think the 80% is good. I hope the province considers that 80% number. I remember a time when we used to say 70% was the ideal utilization rate of a school because it added more flexibility. We're now way beyond that when we say the ideal. It's no longer even close to 70, and we're thankful when it's not over 100. But I do appreciate that, and I think those suggestions are really good because this really is new ground that we're charting in terms of these podium schools, and I'm sure we'll learn more as we go along. So I hope they keep the regulation flexible for us. Thank you so much, staff, for and Mr. Gowdy, for your work on this. Thank you.
And we have Trustee Earhart.
Thank you so much. I wanted to, I'll go back to the surplus properties regulation in a moment. I just wanted to comment on the schools on shared sites portion. And just a big thank you to staff because I thought this report was excellent. I think all the recommendations in it are excellent, and I thought the unique considerations I thought were very insightful. I thought it, by way of feedback, I thought it may be helpful to note that these are not that it isn't necessarily completely comprehensive, to leave space to offer additional feedback over time, as this is an area that is still quite new. The one just on a second read of it that I was thinking about was child care centers and wraparound care. Now, I don't have any podium schools in the ward I represent, but the way we see what constitutes our school grades now, if one imagines that we had to integrate something like full day kindergarten again, and we became fixed with sites like we may with podium schools, we would be really challenged. And so just building off the conversation that we just had around capacity, I think if once a school is located in one of these spaces, there will be a call for wraparound services to support children. And if those wraparound services are not planned for or provided for, not just in the private market, but in a subsidized or public market, the broader objectives of the Ministry of Education or the government as a whole won't be achieved. And so child care centers, before and after care, wraparound care, all need to be important pieces of that puzzle. So I wanted to invite that just as a comment, because there will, I would imagine at these sites there will be increased pressure. And if it's only private childcare available nearby, it won't present a complete option for the community. So that's my comment for that. I don't know if staff have any response to that, I can pause before surplus properties.
Through the chair, I think that's a great comment that when we do enter into a school on a shared site, it requires a lot of advanced planning and a lot of advanced thought and collaboration with other service providers, like the city's children's services branch, to understand their needs, like Parks, Forestry, and Recreation, to understand the services that they're providing. So there is a need for a lot of advanced work and collaboration, and it does need to be thought through. What's the relationship between all these different service providers? So we can add a couple sentences there emphasizing, the need for that pre-work, basically, in the master planning of the building.
Okay, thank you very much. I also wanted to say I really appreciated the need for timely responses from the ministry and that feedback within that portion. I thought that was very helpful and important feedback to be providing. Back to the surplus sites, and this is a question for the board, really. If we wanted to submit comments, sort of layering from staff comments or emphasizing key aspects that we as a board would wish to emphasize. I believe we already have a motion that is supportive of doing so, but wanted to get comments from others on the board, or perhaps the chair, around if we feel that's merited at this time. I'm of the view that it would be merited around retaining the two key points that I feel, but I would invite others, are around retaining the school board's autonomy and choice to recommend at what times properties should be declared surplus by us, and then also the importance of continued public ownership in that first pass by other public entities prior to going to the private market. Thank you.
So part of why this report is here this evening, not just the short timeline, is because as a board we gave the chair direction earlier this year to comment on all the bits and pieces that are going to fall out from Bill 98 and the and its regulations. So when this came to our attention, actually through OBSPA notices, if trustees are watching the OBSPA pieces that go out to all trustees, the notices for these different consultations are in there, especially under the Hansard and the wrap-up emails. So this came to our attention, which we highlighted to the chair, and the chair's asked staff to put this together. So yes, I will turn it over to Trustee Charnos-Lynn, maybe to comment on whether there's an opportunity. I don't know if this one is going to have a public opportunity the same way that the bill had, the regulation, or we're just putting this forward as a chair now, or sorry, this is coming from our board as a general feedback.
Through the chair, I don't think that it's going to a public committee. I think there are opportunities to submit it. It could be, I'm open to however the board thinks that this should be submitted, whether it's through staff or through the chair of the board with a letter attached to it. I'll take a quick look on the portal. To be honest, I don't remember, but we've been certainly encouraged on chairs calls with the minister. We've been encouraged to submit feedback on this. So perhaps Trustee Laskin might remember. She looks like she's got something to say.
I don't think it matters. I think it should be submitted on behalf of the Toronto District School Board. And I think it probably makes sense because it's a planning report to be submitted by Stacy, because it's not going to come to board because we have to meet the deadline. Sorry, Associate Director Zucker, who's in charge of capital, I think she should be the one submitting it.
Yeah, also, yes. Also, the deadline is October 19th, so we don't have the opportunity for a board meeting ahead of this, which is why it's for receipt.
Through the chair, just for my time, would it be possible for us to have staff submit through the regulatory registry portal, but then have our board chair elevate the comments to the minister's office with a cover note emphasizing some of the areas that are important to the board as a whole? So not necessarily through a new motion, because we did have a motion already approved on Bill 98 that I think sufficiently covers some of these areas that we already received board support on. So would that be one way to sort of elevate the comments or highlight the unique board and trustee considerations? That would also afford the opportunity to CC to others that may have an interest that the board chair would more typically CC to rather than staff. Thank you.
Yes, so I'm seeing lots of nodding from the chair and from staff about forwarding that to the ministry and CCing to other agencies or ministries, or both. Okay. Was that it for your questions, Trustee Earhart? Oh. And if so,
yes, for me that's great. And if we don't need another motion, sorry.
No, we don't need another motion for that one. Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Next we have Trustee Dawson.
Thank you. Through the chair. So I apologize if this has already been covered or explained. I have a million things going on in the background here, but part of this seems to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, identifying what potential concerns or things that would need to be addressed before entering an agreement. And so my Trustee Earhart has asked a number of questions, including childcare. So that was one of my concerns too. as well around portables and stuff. That was also addressed. But what about dogs? I keep going on and on about dogs, but it is such an issue in the very densely populated areas of the city, particularly my ward where all of these condos are going up. And I'm already concerned about the podium school and the lay of the land there. So what kind of feedback, or is this kind of minutia at this point, are we providing with respect to consideration for rooftop dog off-leash areas? Or is that even part of this?
Through the chair, I know Executive Officer Puccetti has given some thought and consideration to dog runs and dog parks. So maybe Executive Officer Puccetti can share her thinking.
Thank you. And through the chair, thank you, Trustee Dawson, for that question. So I don't think through this we would have the ability to recommend that developers include off-leash dog areas in their condo or in their mixed-use building where we have a podium school. One thing in this, we are recommending that any outdoor play areas that are part of a shared city park are enclosed with fencing. And we've been pretty clear and adamant that that is a very important thing to have for a variety of safety reasons, not just dogs, but also, you know, proximity of the park next to streets or whatever, knowing that there's a fair amount of density in these future proposed projects. So I'm not sure whether we would even be able in this, given our authority and given this regulation, to insist that there always be consideration given for an off-leash dog park. That's tends to fall into the area that the city would oversee through site plan approval and through the city's own planning. I know they are looking at placing more off-leash dog parks throughout the city for the very reasons you've raised. So for us, the most important thing is that we have adequate space, that we have an enclosed fenced area, and that and that we have an outdoor play area that is also located on the roof of the podium building, for example. Hope that helps.
Okay, thanks. That is helpful, and certainly we'll be working and following up with the city councilors on their guidelines. I wondered, for the fencing around the yard, will we be proposing a minimum height? Because I have schools with fencing around them that are being used as fenced-in dog parks. So will we be making the height of the fencing? Can we include that? You know, a minimum of so many meters tall so that a person cannot scale the fence with their dog?
Through the chair, I think we can put in some minimum height, but that is usually, that level of detail is usually part of the site plan approval process. And there are, in some cases, bylaws regulating the height around properties. But, you know, we typically deal with that in site plan approval. I'm not sure. I don't think there's any harm with us adding it in here, but I don't think it would probably be taken up because it's so specific and it is something that's covered through the site plan approval process.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I would be interested in having more information about those minimum or maximum heights. Like, I know what it would be for private property, like a home, and many of our schools, so I'll give Jean Lum as an example, the fencing is much shorter. So that's, I think, maybe an offline conversation, but I appreciate the context today. So thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, could I get, we need a mover and a second, this is for receipt, right? Can I get a mover and a seconder for receipt? Trustee Laskin, Trustee DeVitis. Can we open the vote, please?
Chernis Lynn in favor. Thank you.
Shan in favor.
Wong in favor.
Thank you, everyone. That carries. And our last item, oh, sorry, second to last item is on the agenda is item 5.5, the 2024-25 Grant for Student Needs consultation by the Ministry of Education.
Thank you, and I will ask Executive Officer Snyder to speak to this report.
Thank you. And through the chair, the Ministry of Education came out on September 27th with their consultation document for the 24-25 school year and the education funding guide, which is part of Appendix A of the report tonight. School boards were asked to provide feedback and to have their feedback submitted by October 27th. So the ministry document only asked for two areas that the ministry was interested in. One was around special education, special incidents portion, and the special equipment amount. And there were several questions the ministry would like responses to, and we have our special education team working on that work right now. The other area was around strengthening accountability, enhancing transparency, and reducing complexity. And here they're looking at the GSN to reduce the complexity, enhancing transparency of how boards use the funds, as well as looking at the opportunities that exist for better communicate with taxpayers about the GSN and about how the board's alignment to government priorities. So we are working on answering those. They did, as always, offer that school boards can comment on any other issues or concerns they have that they want to bring to the attention as they develop their funding policies and formulas for next year. So we have included in Appendix B for your information last year's consultation document, and we highlighted in that conversation with the ministry 4 areas: continuing staff supports and supports for student fund, technology and cybersecurity, lifting the moratorium on closures, and addressing inflation and cost increases. So unfortunately, due to the time frame, we won't have a large amount of time to consult with our statutory SEAC and PEAC or our community. So what we're asking for tonight is your thoughts on some areas that we'd like to cover this year in the document. So we are looking at increasing staff supports for student achievement, well-being, and safety. And in this area, we'll talk about the paraprofessionals and professionals that support students' well-being, safety, including social workers. We'll talk about additional staff to provide for caring and safe adults for all students. We'll talk about additional curriculum supports to promote curriculum, tutoring supports to be continued, the increase in support for safe and caring schools, literacy and numeracy supports we know is so important for our students, and funding for the right to read recommendations, and funding to support professional development for all our staff in schools. We also like to address again support for funding pressures, including utilities, materials, and repair and maintenance costs that we know are increasing constantly. We'd also like to have funding to cover historic and current underfunded increases in statutory benefits. We also, as we did last year, want to address the lifting of the moratorium. And we want to do wraparound services that support violence reduction in schools and school communities, including community-based programming we want to comment to. Again, we want to emphasize mental health supports for our students and staff coming out of the pandemic and dealing with the violence that we're seeing in our communities, and return to the efficiency and modernization fund that supported structural improvement in school boards, and funding to support improved accessibility in our schools for our students and staff, as we've talked about in the capital report earlier tonight, and increased funding to support one-to-one device technology. So we are looking for feedback from trustees if these are the areas that they'd like addressed, or there's additional areas. We will prepare the commentary and submit it to the ministry on October 27th, and then we'll report back to the special FBAC on November 19th with a copy of the submission. And of course, the final submission will also be posted on our budget website for our stakeholders to see. And through you, Madam Chair, we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you. So far I have Trustee Laskin and Trustee McLean. Trustee Laskin, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for staff for this exhaustive list. I am wondering if it will begin like we have in the past, that we're advocating for I forget the terminology that we use, but stable and predictable and full funding to cover the cost of public education. I think it needs an overall general statement that we want our true costs covered. And then the other point I would add under increasing staffing to support student achievement, well-being, and safety, I would ask funding for combating hate and racism.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Trustee McLean.
Thank you. And excuse me. Thank you. And through the chair, I'm wondering whether we have, or if it's possible to ask for an extension to consult with SEAC. This is something the government mandates, this advisory committee. This was something I suspect that they would be interested in weighing in on. And yet we don't have the opportunity because of the very narrow timeline. So I was wondering whether we had the opportunity to ask for an extension so we would have the ability to consult with SEAC.
Through you, Madam Chair, we can ask that request, but I would suggest that if we do ask, we'll have to make sure we consult with PEAC as well. So we'll have to look at their 2 meeting schedules to see when their next meetings are, so we can get time with them. If we are granted the extension, we're more than happy to work with PEAC and SEAC as we have in the past. So I'm just trying to look up the dates right now just to see if Denise has them faster than I do. But we'll look and see what those dates are for those 2 committees to see how much time we would be asking for.
Just to follow up, if I may, through the chair. If an extension isn't possible, is it possible to offer the committees an opportunity? Do they have the ability to have emergency meetings? No? Okay. Never mind then. Thank you.
I see November 20th for SEAC. I'm just looking.
Okay. So I've already included it in the trustee update and given the budget committee for SEAC a heads up that it's there. I've sent them the documents. So, and they meet next week. So that, yeah, and they are working, SEAC has been working on, members have been working on a support letter similar to ours from the spring on SIP funding, which is one of the ministry's review asks. So yes, not quite as formally as we normally would have done it, but it is going out as information and ask for feedback. Do we have any other questions or comments? Trustee Earhart, go ahead.
Hi, thanks very much. Thanks everybody else for their comments. I wanted to see if we could add something around the motion that we supported around dedicated. It was largely about capital funding envelopes, but also around operating funding envelopes for reducing the spread of illness in school and to support continued public health promotion activities in and around schools. And so we as a board had approved a motion on that, and I think that would be a great thing to add to the big list, but also very supportive of Trustee Laskin's comments. I also wonder if we may have an opportunity in this submission to note that due to the timelines, we were unable to hold dedicated meetings for comments with SEAC or PEAC, and that comments may follow arising from meetings with them. That way we are able to submit quick comments to the Ministry of Education while also acknowledging our obligation to engage with those bodies as well. Thank you.
Sorry, we're just also checking if the GSN consultation is posted to the public. Because I thought it was.
It is.
Yeah, it's posted for public comment as well.
Okay.
So members wouldn't necessarily have to go through us.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, there's no more questions, or did you want to comment on? Okay, if there's no more questions, could I get a mover and a seconder for this item? Trustee McLean, Trustee DeVitis, and could we open the vote, please?
Shan in favor.
Wall in favor.
Thank you very much, that carries. And our last item is adjournment. Could I get a mover and a seconder to adjourn the meeting? Trustee Charles-Lynn, Trustee McLean, who's already leaving the room. And all in favor? Show of hands.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much. And good night.